Hello and welcome everyone. In this video I'll be sharing some of my experiences when I played Classic WoW and Final Fantasy XIV, compare the two, and tell you why I chose Final Fantasy XIV over Classic WoW. If you want to skip straight to the talking points, I have included the timestamps in the description below. So, let's start with Classic WoW. The first time playing Classic WoW was like going back to something familiar. It was like riding a bicycle. I originally started WoW at the end of Vanilla back in 2006 and stopped playing shortly after Cataclysm was released. Even though this game is nearing its Sweet 16, stepping back into Azeroth was fresh. Everyone was starting over from the beginning again, yearning for a game to transport them into another world. I too was swept up by the excitement. The waves of nostalgia pulled me into the sea known as Classic WoW. It was awesome seeing so many people excited to play this game. I played the game with two friends. We had a 3-man group. We could do pretty much everything on our own. It was great. We hit max level in 2.5 weeks. That was by no means blisteringly fast, but it wasn't slow either. It took someone only 3 days to hit max level, and you have to wonder, how can someone level that quickly? To put it simply, the game is old. A majority of players are experienced WoW veterans. Many have played this version of the game for years on private servers for free, only to turn around and happily give Blizzard their money to play it officially. No stone has been left unturned, no guide has been left unpublished. Players are leveling faster than ever, raids are being cleared at a record pace. And as those waves of nostalgia slowly receded, I realized that the bicycle I was riding earlier was a rusty piece of junk under a thin coat of rose-tinted paint. I wasn't really enjoying the game so much anymore. In Classic WoW, I needed to play with my friends to make it fun. Like, why did I feel the need to level up so quickly? Because if I didn't, I felt I was going to be left behind. I guess at that time, I really wanted to do the Molten Chore 2 weeks earlier than the next guy. Yeah, that got old real quick. After my friends stopped enjoying the game, and eventually quit after 4 months of playing, I played for another 2 months. I wanted to see what Blackwing Lair was like. Was it going to be like the speedrun Molten Core was? Well, sadly it was. So that got old too. Well, what about PvP? That was released before BWL, so that was something to do, right? Well, as a Horde player, Battleground queue times were horrendous, so that was a bummer. You can probably see where this is going. I eventually got bored of Classic WoW, but I still wanted to play an MMO. I didn't really have to look very hard to find that Final Fantasy XIV was the next most popular MMO. One of the few MMOs that still required you to fork over a monthly subscription fee and not make you feel like you're completely wasting your money, which is impressive. But you're probably wondering, why did you wait this long to start playing Final Fantasy XIV? It's been out for years. Well, back in 2010, I did play the original, albeit the beta version, and my experience was so bad that it put me off from playing it again until this year, nearly a full decade later. But in the year 2020, I finally re-entered into the world of Final Fantasy XIV, and it's been awesome. So that brings us to the 6 things I think Final Fantasy XIV does better than Classic WoW. Number 1. The community. In my personal experience, I found the Final Fantasy XIV community to be more welcoming and helpful. If you needed help in Classic WoW, people may just refer you to the gaming manual. I understand that forming meaningful relationships might not be your thing because humans suck, but I found it to be pleasant in Final Fantasy XIV. However, if you play a hot female character, there is a good chance people might think you're a female, so there's that. Okay, so the community in Final Fantasy XIV can be slightly more cringy, but you could ignore those people, or just ignore everyone, and then it'll be the same as Classic WoW. Of course, not everyone is like that. The community in Final Fantasy XIV is there if you want it, whereas it's not really there in Classic WoW. To me, Final Fantasy XIV feels like a social game, whereas Classic WoW feels like a speedrun parsing simulator. Number 2. Storytelling. Hands down, Final Fantasy XIV takes the nod for this one. Is there a story in Classic WoW? Well, technically yes, but you wouldn't know from the quests you get in-game. Both universes have awesome lore, full of richness and depth, but in Final Fantasy XIV there is a quest line called the Main Scenario Quest, or more commonly known as the Main Story Quest, or MSQ for short. You do this quest line, everything else is optional. Your character is fully integrated into the story as the Warrior of Light, whereas in Classic WoW, you kind of feel like a nobody. Except when the War Chief acknowledges you. That's cool. Number 3. Leveling. I enjoyed the leveling experience in Final Fantasy a lot more. It felt like less of a grind, and that's partly because of the storytelling mentioned in point 2. But other than that, you don't have to create a whole new character to play another class. Simply unlock that class from someone in town and equip a weapon that class uses, and you're on your way. You don't have to do all those quests again, unless you really want to in New Game Plus. Number 4. Things to do in-game. Let me tell you, there are a lot more things to do in Final Fantasy XIV. The crafting system is much more robust. There are 11 occupations in total, and you can level each one to max if you wanted to. In Classic WoW, there are a similar number of professions, but you are limited to 2 primary professions of your choice, and the same 3 secondary professions as everyone else. So if you wanted to level up other professions, you had to level up a separate character, which is kinda lame. But also, there isn't much to do in Classic WoW, and that ties in to there being a lack of community. My experience is that a lot of players raid log, and what that means is that they only log in to raid. Then you won't see them again until the next scheduled raid. There simply isn't all that much to do in Classic WoW. You can farm a few hours for some consumables for next raid, and then do it again next week. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, in Final Fantasy XIV, you can own a fully customizable house and apartment, which is an awesome way to find out your weekend is gone, because you spent way too much time deciding where each piece of furniture needs to go. So this one easily goes to Final Fantasy XIV. Okay, so the next 2 are subjective. Well, this whole list is subjective, but these are especially subjective. Does that even make any sense? Anyways. Number 5, the music. Aside from maybe 3 tracks in Classic WoW, Final Fantasy XIV takes this for me, hands down. Not much to say about this one. Number 6, the graphics. Is this even fair? Final Fantasy XIV is a lot newer. Classic WoW has been enhanced a bit, and remarkably, still holds up well despite its age. But at the end of the day, I'd rather look at Final Fantasy XIV. Lastly, as you may have read in the title, what is the one thing Classic WoW does better? Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, the controls. Classic WoW feels more fluid, more snappy. Maybe this is a compromise that needed to be made to allow PS4 players to play. But sometimes in Final Fantasy XIV, your character feels like he or she is stuck. It's a bit strange. For example, right after using an ability, or loading into a new zone. It's something to get used to. Slide casting in Final Fantasy XIV is funny to look at, but it's not a big deal. There's probably nothing that can be done about the controls in Final Fantasy XIV at this point in time, but it's also not a deal breaker. But credit needs to be given to Classic WoW for doing a better job in this department. There you have it. 6 things Final Fantasy does better, and 1 thing it does not. Now, there were a few things I did not include on this list. You might be wondering, what about PvP? What about the endgame? Well, I have yet to do those things in Final Fantasy XIV, so that'll have to wait till later in a future video. So, after all of this, what have we learned today? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But in all seriousness, it's okay for your opinion to differ from that of somebody else's. Be respectful and play what you want to play. I'll be playing Final Fantasy XIV, and maybe I'll see you there. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this, consider subscribing and giving the video a thumbs up. It will help me out a lot. Let me know if you played either game, or both, and why you choose to play what you play. Maybe you play another MMO altogether. You can share your experience down below. I'm still pretty new to this, so let me know in the comments section what you might want to see next. Maybe a reaction to a trailer, a game review, or even a movie review. Lastly, thank you so much if you made it all the way to the end. I stream a variety of games on Twitch. You can check me out there. I still haven't played Final Fantasy XIV patch 5.1 and beyond, so if you want to watch that, you can follow me on Twitter, where I will announce when I will be playing a few days in advance. Also, it will be October next month. I will be focusing on horror, suspense, and thriller games. If you have any recommendations, leave a comment below. Take care, everyone. Alright. And night is back.